Well, hey, Michael Sayen coming back on the channel to talk about enforced monogamy. Wow, what a subject. Enforced monogamy. Boy, I think we could get in trouble for this one. Hey, if you're liking this content, give me a like, subscribe, give me a comment below. Let's get to it. Michael, the subject today is serial monogamy. No, not serial monogamy. Enforced monogamy. We already have serial monogamy, but
Yeah.
forced monogamy. We are going to force every single man and woman to get married here. This is
Yeah. Amen. The government's going to force the incels to get married. It's going to force innocent women to marry these
yeah.
incels.
I got so that's what Jordan Peterson got in trouble for, right? Was he
Right.
mentioned the psychological term of enforced monogamy, or no, maybe it's a anthropological term, enforced
Yes.
monogamy, and
Hmm.
then just got crucified in the media at large for saying enforced monogamy because everybody thought, oh, this is going to be a handmaid's tale where every man is going to have a woman that will be forced to be married to him. There, right?
Yeah. Well, it's funny thing is that why did everyone freak out about it? Right. Because like normal a mistake like that, like, oh, well, hey, I made a mistake. It's understandable. But the
Yeah.
question to me is why was this such why did it freak out the community? And I think one of the things is the falling birth rates. And
Well, I was just going to
there's
say, I think there was a fake freak out because people want to take down Jordan
yeah,
Peterson
right,
as some
right.
crazed lunatic because they lump him. I'm surprised that I think it was in the New York Times. There was an article about him where they lumped him, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, and Andrew Tate. They lumped all in the same extreme right camp.
Right.
I was just like, what? Those guys are so
Right.
different. Like, how on earth are they all getting lumped in to the same camp? Now, Andrew Tate's pretty extreme, but those other two guys, they are not extreme. So it's like, how is this extreme right with these three guys? But anyway, all that to say, I'm just making a point. I think that's why everybody just pounced on it to freak out about because, oh, now we can get Jordan Peterson on. He's a crazy lunatic on the right now.
Yeah, right. The build the strong man so you can burn them alive. Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. But go ahead, though. So we've got enforced monogamy, what that is, and then, what that really means for society.
Yeah. So it was big enough thing that Jordan Peterson talked about, and I think it's more than just the term. There's something behind it, right? And there's like, what does it mean, and does it have any value for us today? Maybe you could speak a little bit. You and I both recently saw the Right Response Ministries
Yeah, yeah,
did a piece with Matt Walsh and Andrew Tate,
yeah.
and maybe you could tell the audience a little bit about their conversation of monogamy and polygamy, and
Yeah,
maybe what your
good.
thoughts were.
Well, yeah, really good conversation. I
Yeah,
actually
it was.
was impressed how fair they were.
Hmm.
The guys from Right Response Ministries, so Joel Webben, and then his two co-hosts he has on the show there. How fair they were to the polygamy question. That they didn't do what I've seen some pastors do, which is just totally ridiculous to take like one verse out of context and say, okay, yes, polygamy is never for wasn't for that time really, and it certainly isn't for this time today. So one of the verses would be, I think it's in Deuteronomy where it says, "A king shall not multiply wives." So boom, therefore no polygamy ever. God already said it, and that's case closed. And it's like just making stupid arguments for it. So they actually gave it a very they gave polygamy a chance and said, yes, it was for the Old Testament times. It was not sin. Well, I don't know. If they said necessarily it
They didn't.
wasn't.
I don't think they said it was a sin or not, but
Yeah, you're
I
right. I
think
don't
that
think they
was
ever declared that it wasn't
yeah. I think that was the implication
sin.
somewhat, but I
Yeah.
think what the end was, and this was the interesting part. they said this should please the red pill people, right? And that they said that, hey, 99% monogamy is the way to go. However, there is
Mm.
1% that polygamy may be the way to go, or it might be all right to go that way for the Christian church. And
Yeah,
so,
and they appealed. I think they were mostly appealing to Rushdoony, who was a theologian, which the theonomy and a theonomist really appeals to Rushdoony, and so they were appealing to him to say monogamy only may not be the best way. That there could be a case to be made, a very small case to be made, that polygyny, a man having more than one wife, could be permissible in extreme cases. Then that that could be permitted based on what Rushdoony had said. But I think, if I'm not, I mean, you listen to it also, but I think that's a fair way of the, because otherwise their arguments were more from Western history, that we don't practice polygamy, and monogamy has led to Western society being very prosperous, and da 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 da. I'm not really that interested in what some of the church fathers said and what Western history says and all that kind of stuff. I'm more interested in, what does Scripture say? Like,
right,
what does God say about this? And then we can delineate from there. But
right,
anyway, though, I think so. The door was left open that maybe in extreme cases that the church could leave polygamy or polygyny, where one man, multiple wives, could leave that on the table. But God's ideal is monogamy. And, I think I can get on board with that, that the ideal is monogamy. But we don't live in an ideal world. So, maybe there could be a case to be made to leave that door open in a righteous way. So, yeah, with that segue, I guess, then we get to, where did enforced monogamy come from? Then, if in the ancient times, polygamy was the deal, like that, every society had it. Like
right.
it,
Every
yeah,
major civilization started with polygamy,
yeah.
and the Bible starts with polygamy. So it starts with the law, the law of Moses, or and so the
Yeah.
question is, right, is, first of all, is it sin or is it not? That's what you and I are concerned on. We're not concerned is which one's safe for women, which one's safe for children, which one. Joel Webbins actually said, hey, if you want to be in polygamous society and you're fine living in huts, then live in huts. But if you want your iPhone, if you want civilization, as if you want toasters, if you want microwaves, then you have to live in a monogamous society. And that was his conclusion.
Yeah.
And I think we need to stay away from that, right? I think we need to stay
Yeah,
away from.
that's such a non sequitur. I forgot. I was going to look up the psychological term for that, when you equivocate one thing that has nothing to do with another and say, well, see, this is why it happened. And it's like, come on, man, like that. We're prosperous because of this one thing with marriage. Like, okay. Anyway, go on.
No, no, it's like, so I think it's great because you've been having this is Shaw on, and
Mm.
he's talking about the gold pill,
Yeah.
and that's going to be the dowry, and the dowry became. They said it started in the Dakota Hammurabi, I believe I'm saying that right, in Babylon,
Okay.
and so in BC times, and then it became popular with ancient Greece back in 5 BC. Rome was actually influenced by Greece by their religion, and a whole bunch of other actually things from Greece. So they
Oh yeah,
adopted.
Roman culture was
Yes,
a Hellenistic culture,
yes,
which
yes, it
was the
was.
Greek culture. Like
Hmm.
they totally just stole
They
all of
stole their
the
gods.
Greek
They stole
culture.
everything. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, just
yep,
renamed the Greek gods to
yep,
Roman gods. It's
yep.
just kind of like, Okay, whatever.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, but that's, and so they adopted the polygamous culture, and then we read the New Testament where they're in, or sorry, monogamous culture, and
yeah,
then we read in the New Testament because they were under Jewish occupation, sorry, Roman occupation. The Jews were under Roman occupation during the
yeah.
time of Jesus, so they were bound to certain laws by Rome, and one of those was that polygamy was unlawful. And so we are
Well,
reading the
but there
New.
was, I mean, even in New Testament times, like
Yeah.
Herod the Great, he had multiple wives,
Yes,
and
it was always allowed for the rich and famous. And Andrew Tate actually talks about this. You know, it's like in
yeah,
every society, when you're dealing with the rich, the high minded, they were either high status, they are allowed to have concubines, or they were allowed to have multiple wives, and that's
yeah.
what they did. So
And
it's
even
a
let me say this though,
yeah.
Michael, too. Like even societies today, mostly maybe exclusively Muslim societies, um, that allow that is it's perfectly lawful to have more than one. It's I think the last statistic I saw it was like in the single digits for how many men have more than one. Like I have a friend from Malaysia, which is mostly Muslim, and he said there's very few men that, even though it's completely lawful and whatever else, like there's very few that have more than one, because he's like, you practically speaking, you have to be rich to have more than one wife, is how it
Mhm.
works in, at least in Malaysia. And I think that's typical of, other Muslim nations. So how many guys are rich? Not very many. So, so yeah, I think it was like single. I want to say it might have been in the. Well, I don't know. I shouldn't say, but I was thinking less than 1%, but that may not be true. But I know at
I
least
think
in
I
the
read the
single
same
digit.
thing, 1 to 3%. Actually, the
Yeah,
people of Muslim sexual practices, but they said
yeah.
that I sent you a little bit of information today from AI Google, which we are starting to hate AI Google, but
Oh man, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But AI Google was talking about Islam and that they are allowed to have up to 4 wives. However, it's they say that it's the Quran looks down upon this, and that for the most
Hmm.
cases, except for widows and orphan girls or a time for war that all the men die, then repopulation is, and the necessity of women not being
Hmm.
left barren, the necessity of multiple marriages may be practiced. And it's interesting because Joel Webben said the same thing on Right Response Ministries, that they said, hey, if we have a next world war and half the men population are gone, it's just not right for these women to be barren and left alone, and polygamy may be the right thing to do. Not even allowed. He said it might be the right thing to do.
Yeah,
So
and
that's the same
I
thing they said.
agree. I agree with that too. And that's what Joel was saying. Rushdoony wrote, back whenever he wrote that, about how it could be permissible, just like in the Old Testament when that happened, and men took more than one wife and whatnot, or for Levirate marriage,
The
where
levirate marriage, right?
you would marry your deceased brother's
Brothers.
widow
Mm-hmm.
so that his family line could continue.
Right.
Um, I think that's kind of cool. We just don't, in the modern day, we could care less about our family lines continuing. Is
Yeah.
That's kind of why we look at that like, what? That's the stupidest thing. And I think about that a lot. Like I've got 3 sons. My 3 sons are the last of my name in my whole entire extended family. Like I don't know a single man in my extended family that has a child of this generation there, which is kind of crazy to think about, that like my 3 boys are it for, for me. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's well, it's interesting. I like that all these conversations are coming up, and they're
Yeah.
starting to think outside the box. And this is Shaw has becoming really popular with Pearlie
Mm.
Davis, with Paul Elam and other shows. And he's starting to become more popular on talking about the dowry, and because it's interesting when not only do you have 4 aspects, you have polygamy and monogamy, or what we call enforced monogamy, polygamy is never enforced through anthropology because all civilizations started to be polygamous. 75% of all 75% of all civilization have been polygamous at some time. They say,
They
and
allowed for
so
it.
yeah, they did it at some point. And the thing is that monogamy, though it may be more productive for a society, it has to be forced by the government. It can't simply be forced by religion or by social pressures or by the community or families. It
Mhm.
must be forced by laws, and there has
Um,
to be because there has to be some type of punishment for those who break those laws. So it always has to be enforced. They try to say just socially, but no, it's forced through the government or through laws
so that's
that
where we
force a
get the
culture.
term enforced monogamy.
Yeah, right, right. That's what
That
anthropologists get that. Yeah, and
so
so it's forced.
societies are naturally polygamous, but we bring in the government to enforce monogamy in civilized societies as they progress. Is that
Right. And the interesting thing is that we're the same as animals, where we're naturally, this is what people say, we're naturally polygamous. Animals are naturally polygamous. That fishes are polygamous. There's many, many animals that they're not one spouse for life. And so
mm,
people, if we don't have laws or we don't seem to have that tendency outside of Christianity, right? Just I'm talking about just the natural state of man to
mm,
be one mate for life, right?
yeah,
That's very rare in the animal kingdom. And so the only thing difference between animal and people is marriage, right? Because animals still have the man rule, the father rule, the woman take care of the children, the men, go out and hunt, except for some lions. But for the
oh,
most part, everything that we see how the structure of patriarchy is set up in we see a lot of that in the animal kingdom. But the only thing that separates us from animals is marriage, right? Making that commitment through a promise that
well, I
I'm
don't
going to
know.
be
There's a
with this
lot of
customer.
things that separate us from animals, I think,
Oh
right?
no, no, no. But I meant as far as I think that are we naturally polygamous or are we naturally monogamous? I think the answer to that is that it could be either or. But I think that
Mm,
the only thing that separates us from the animals, where we could have a tendency to be polygamous, is the state of marriage itself. Because without marriage, I don't believe we would be monogamous by nature. And I
mm,
think that's where the anthropologists used enforced monogamy because monogamy can only be enforced by pressure
yeah.
of society, by pressure of the religion, or pressure of the laws. And that's
Yeah.
so polygamy is never enforced. They don't call it enforced polygamous or polygamy. They call it enforced monogamy. Now, the other question is that, how does the bride price and the dowry play in this? This is Shaw talks about the dowry, and he also talks about, monogamy. And that seemed to become very popular. Monogamy and dowry seemed to become very popular together. As monogamy became more popular and polygamy became unlawful, or enforced monogamy became more popular, then the bride price seemed to go away, and the dowry seemed to actually starting to appear
Hmm.
because a woman could only be married to one man, and so that one man or that one marriage became highly sought by for women, and so they were willing to pay whatever it costs to marry that one man. If you're in a polygamous society and say that a woman paid for a dowry for a man, well, the guy could just turn around and marry 10 other women.
Yeah.
So, in a monogamous society, the woman, when she became the wife of that man, not only did it guarantee that she would be able to share or take a part of all of his resources, but that the inheritance would be passed through her blood, her family bloodline as well as his.
Do you
So
think if we brought back, I was thinking about this today, if we brought back dowry, do you think then like parents would go and get a loan from the bank to give like a really big dowry to the husband and then they could spend, another 10 years of their life paying back that
they
loan?
would they would if the children remained at home, if the children remained, if the women remained at home, right, which it says in the Bible, a man shall leave his father and mother and then cleave to his wife. So the woman never says she leaves her mother and father. So if women stayed at home under their father's roof, then yes, the dowry system would be, because these women would most likely would stay virgins, because of the father, limiting. They wouldn't have dating and so forth. Like, they have a tendency not to promote dating. And if that was the case, where women became waited for marriage to lose their virginity, they stayed at home under their father's roof and protection and provision, then yes, the dowry could be used. But if women are moving out of the house, it says after a girl, right now, statistically, a girl who is 20 years old and younger, 50% of the women are virgins. After 20, I think it's 20 to 24, she has a 25% chance of still being a virgin. Then after 25, I think it shoots down to 3%. So the thing is that so it
Wow.
shoots down really, really fast after she
Wow,
leaves the home.
yeah, that's kind of crazy. Okay.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
statistics. So that's
Well,
today's
now
statistics.
that's the gold pill though that we're taught like that
Sure.
dowry you as a man can take the gold pill, meaning you expect to receive a dowry from a wife that you're going to marry. And I think, and we've talked about there's the alternative to that would be the silver pill, which is the bride price, where a man would pay a price to take on the wife, and that would be the silver pill, right? Is that kind of what we're
Yeah.
saying?
Well, it's see, the dowry and the bride price are not they're not different sides of the coins. The reason why is because when the dowry is paid to the man, to the husband. Okay. The bride price is not supposed to be paid to the woman. The bride price is supposed to be paid to the woman's father, and
Yeah,
that would be to be able to transfer the authority. So if the bride
yeah.
price and the dowry were completely opposites, then a dowry, can you still see me okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm just sometimes I gotta turn off my camera goes blurry, so I gotta turn it off and on so it
Yeah, right.
clears itself back up. I don't know why it won't autofocus sometimes.
Right. Well, if the dowry was exactly like the bride price, then what would happen is a dowry would be paid to the man's father, and their family, but it's not. It's paid to the man, so that means it goes right back into the marriage. So there is quite a difference as far as dowry and bride price. They're not opposites. They're not true opposites. So
Wait a minute,
bride
you mean
price,
the bride price is paid to the bride's father, right?
yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. So
yeah, and the
because I
dowry is
think
not paid.
in general is because he's losing a worker from his household, and this suitor, this husband, is gaining a worker into his household, and then also he's able to have children with her as well,
Well,
right?
that's what anthropologists somewhat say, but then we have to look at the biblical model. Is we have to say, okay, when the bride price was first practiced in the Old Testament,
Yeah,
right? What type, did society regulate that, or did the Bible regulate that? Because when it says in Deuteronomy 24:1, right, it says when a man acquires a wife. The word acquires in the Hebrew is the same word where it says Abraham acquired land.
yeah,
So the question is, and then we look at Genesis chapter 2, verses 23-25, where it says, "A man shall cleave to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh." Is that what we see? Is that we see the young man, leave his mother and father, and then he seeks for a wife, right?
yeah,
After he finds a wife, he barters with the father of the young woman, and then so there has to be some type of bartering to be able to obtain his daughter, right?
yeah.
So there's always been that bride price. It has been a foundation to Jesus, right, where Jesus paid the bride price for the church. And so there's always been that foundation that was an example, right? Marriage was an example of Christ in the church, right? We know that because Ephesians 5 tells us that it was a mystery hidden from old. And one of the things is one of the main things that we see with marriage is the bride price, and then Jesus paying that price for the church and redeeming it, and Hosea paying a price for his wife, even though it was already his wife and she was given to another man. Hosea redeemed Gomer with a price, and that was the same thing with Jesus, redeeming us through the price, the
Yeah.
purchase price, which is called the purchase price. So
Very
one of the
true.
questions is that is a bride price a purchase price? Well, yes. If we look at Scripture, bride price and purchase price was always going together. So, and one of the things was that we do know it transferred the authority of the, in Numbers chapter 30, verses 2 through 16, it says that a woman and a young woman under the father's roof is subject to her father. Whatever he says goes. All of her oaths, promises, even unto God or man. He has the authority the day he hears it to nullify it or by silence be able to confirm it. So he has power over his daughter's oath. She can't make promises or get into a marriage or a betrothal on her own as long as she's young, living under her father's roof. So what we do is that when a young man, like in Genesis 2:25, right, where he goes that the man shall leave his father and mother, cleave to his wife, when he goes to cleave to her and she's under her father's roof, he has to go ahead and he has to, that transfer of authority. And then in Numbers 30, verses 2 through 16, it also says that transfer of authority happens, and therefore all that authority of her father, it says in Numbers 30, transfers to the young man. So he has authority over her or her oaths, and so forth, because that authority has been transferred.
So he pays the bride price and therefore gains the authority. The authority is transferred to him.
Right.
And in that system, this is the silver pill system.
Right.
Then he can also pay, if he's wealthy enough, he can pay the bride price for another bride as well. And that was lawful in the Old Testament.
Yeah, right. It doesn't really state how this all worked, right? And we also have concubines, and it doesn't really it doesn't the interesting thing with premarital sex, right? We look in the Old Testament. Does the Old Testament say that a married man it's a sinful for a married man to have a concubine? It doesn't say it's sin. It doesn't say, at least anywhere I know, and it doesn't say that it's sin for a married man to actually have sex with a woman outside of a marriage, right? And then we see that because we see the story.
Well, if he doesn't marry her, it is right.
Well, not necessarily, because remember the story with Abraham and Sarah. Sarah said, "Hey, here's my servant," right?
Oh,
Right, and so you can, and at the end, right? What happened was the servant was kicked out of the home as well as with her son. So if he was married to Sarah's maidservant, then she probably most likely would not be kicked out of the home because he would have the responsibility to provide and protect her. So because she and the child were kicked out of the home, it shows that, to my understanding, that there was no marriage between Sarah's maidservant and
well,
Abraham.
I think we might need to be careful though with Abraham because the law of Moses hadn't been given yet. But it seems like once the law of Moses is given, if you take a wife and then you want to take another woman, and let's say you have marital relations with her, but then you don't marry her, then I think that's still fornication. Like you have to marry her, or else,
right? Because
you certainly can't do that with another married woman, because then that is adultery.
That's adultery.
Simple in the Bible,
right?
Like anyone taking a married woman, that's adultery.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it says not even a man can't even covet another man's wife. So that was part of the Ten Commandments. So it says,
and hey, you know what? When I look around, boy, that command for me is just so easy to follow. I see a lot of other wives out there, and I'm just like, boy, I don't want anything to do with these these women. Anyway, all right.
No, it's dangerous. Yeah, but anyways, long story short, and so
like we saw the video with the Coldplay concert with the CEO.
Yeah.
And you got this rich, powerful man. Okay. I'm assuming the guy, if he's the CEO of this company, he's worth millions, right? Rich, powerful man. And who is he choosing to be with? Some other guy's wife who's not even very attractive. And I'm just like, what are you doing? Like there's plenty of single attractive women who would probably love to be with a multimillionaire. And you're with your HR manager who's married, who's not even that attractive. Like, what's wrong with you? Anyway.
Yeah, no, but because the greater the sin, right? The tastier the fruit. So it's we have to remember is like why sin is only pleasurable for a period of time, and then basically we want greater sin. So it's like there is more sin involved with adultery than there is when sleeping with a single girl. And that the question is in the New Testament, like I said, we talked about this. The New Testament seems to say that polygamy is not allowed, not just by the husband of one wife or the wife of one husband, but because what the Bible in the New Testament seems to call, adultery or fornication. It may not be specifically clear, but it does look like the New Testament is promoting a monogamous society, and that married to one. And it's just interesting. And so because of that, Christianity adopted that as law. Like Jesus never said monogamy or polygamy, and we have polygamy in the Old Testament, and we have monogamy practiced in the New Testament. You
Yeah.
don't really see Jesus or God promoting either one. Like you don't see polygamy. It's interesting. People don't talk about this. You don't see polygamy promoted in the Old Testament, and I would say you don't see monogamy promoted in the New Testament. What I see is that I see that Jesus or God, either the law of Moses or what Jesus's commands, is that they seem to make laws that are sensible for the society that they're living in. And Jesus never said monogamy was a sin. Jesus never said polygamy was lawful. I don't know. So it's interesting where it's like, is polygamy sin? No. Is monogamy sin? No. So I think that the point is that we do what is morally right, not for the culture, but we do what is morally right
But
according to the law of God. I don't know, but it's tough. It's a
yeah,
tough
yeah,
call.
that's
It's a
true.
tough
And
call.
and we know that if you're broke, the best you're going to do is monogamy.
Yeah,
We know
yeah. You're lucky if you get monogamy. Yeah, right. You're an incel if you're broke. So, yeah,
because there's shoot, what's the saying? No honey or no money, no honey.
yeah,
That's just
yeah,
how it goes.
yeah.
Anyway, all right. So that's enforced monogamy when civilization gets to be progresses to a certain level. It seems like usually there's always enforced monogamy, except for Islamic countries. Probably the exception to that rule.
Right.
Probably maybe based on Muhammad the Prophet. That I know a friend of mine actually my friend from Malaysia who's telling me about this. I didn't realize Muhammad's first wife was a wealthy widow that he married because because she was kind of in need of a husband, and then I think she actually really helped him in whatever things he was doing, and then along the way when he kind of rose in
Mhm.
power, and then he started taking more and more wives. I don't know how many wives actually Muhammad had total, but I guess his first one was a wealthy widow there. So that's kind of interesting.
No, it's interesting. It's all kind of fascinating, and the question, right? The big question is like, okay, we understand history better. This is Shaw did a great job of bringing history back, talking about it. Now, here's a question: is there anything that we can apply these principles that can change our society? The answer is flat out no. I think any man in their right mind would be able to say the bride price comes back. Will that fix society? No. The dowry comes back. Will that fix society? No. If the Supreme Court is considering, since the gay marriage, they're considering making polygamy lawful here in the United States, as well as in other governments and other
They're
states recently.
currently considering that.
Yeah, a lot of governments actually are currently considering making polygamy lawful. And so the question is that if polygamy ever becomes lawful in the United States, 'cause we're practicing polygamy anyways. So
Yeah.
because remember, adultery used to be against the law. Now adultery is no longer against the law. So you could be legally married to one woman and then have several, makeshift, marriages on the side, and that doesn't become illegal. So,
So
um,
here's a question though. So we know, and people are starting to talk about this more and more and more, that we have a birth rate crisis in the West, in the East, in the North, in the South, everywhere, basically,
everywhere.
except for Sub-Saharan Africa.
Mhm.
Every country has a birth rate crisis that will
Actually,
hit.
I'm going to add on that. the birth rate crisis, it seems to be only in countries that are monogamous and
Hmm.
also that are egalitarian or feminist. I don't think we're having really a birth rate problem in polygamous societies. So and
Oh,
so I presume my presumption is that we're not. And so
no, I don't think that's true.
I could be wrong, but
Because
I believe it's true.
I really like to look into this stuff, and the only countries that have above replacement rate fertility are sub-Saharan African countries.
Which are polygamous.
Yeah, but I mean that excludes like all of the Middle East, all of Asia that would have countries such as Indonesia and Malaysia that are Muslim that can practice polygamy if they choose. Um,
But the
and
question is, do they don't practically they don't. So polygamous countries today that you say are polygamous, they're
yeah,
really not because the laws allow these women to divorce under some most certain circumstances. So what happens is
oh,
that so if in a
yeah,
polygamous
that's
society,
true.
today's polygamous society, you have a 5 times divorce rate, higher divorce rate than you do in monogamous societies today. And that's because you've given the woman the ability in these polygamous societies to divorce. When you do, and also you take on more wives, these women want out. So these are not truly polygamous societies. When you look at
Huh.
real polygamous societies where the women are not allowed to divorce, because the brides are become younger, or what we might consider child brides, the brides are getting married younger. The older men are marrying them, and they're having lots of children. And so I believe if you actually look at logistically at real polygamous societies that practice the bride price, that don't allow the women to divorce, and are patriarchal, I believe you're going to see those societies flourishing. And I think what we're doing is the birth rate is a not only is a direct effect of monogamy, because I believe monogamy brought equality in marriage, which brought the suffrage, it brought equality, and basically has reversed patriarchy. And now we're living in a fem centric societies. And so, and then what we're going to do is
Can you really say
birth
that
rates.
though? Because we've had monogamy since you know what 400 BC, and I mean, can we really say that led to egalitarianism though?
Yeah, yeah, oh, absolutely, absolutely. They'll argue about it.
Because we had
People,
2,000 years of monogamy without egalitarianism though.
no, because monogamy was first really practiced in Greece, ancient Greece, in the 5th century BC, and then by Rome. That was the first large civilization that practiced monogamy. Large civilization that we
Yeah,
know
I
that
mean
that
that's what I mean though. So we've had 2,000 years of monogamy without having egalitarian marriage.
no, that egalitarian happened in those societies. So when we look at the ancient Rome, 600 years before the impact on Greece, women were not allowed to divorce. But what happened was after they became monogamous through enforced monogamy through Greece, immediately women were given the right to divorce. And we see that in Mark 10, verses 11 and 12, where it says, women, don't divorce your husbands. That was not because of the Jewish law allowing women to divorce. That was because of these Jewish women taking advantage of the law of Rome at that time that were allowing women of high status to divorce. And basically, monogamy, enforced monogamy, always brings equality. Now, anthropologists will argue this, and feminists are big to argue against this. But I know for a fact that monogamy always brings some type of equality or women with power and money into that marriage. And
Mhm.
when that happens, right, we give women the right to vote. We put them into political office, and then and then all of a sudden we give them power. They start believe it or not, they start ruining marriage when we give women power, because they're the ones that the women are the reason why we live in a childless world. Right?
Well, that was Michael Sayen. Interesting conversation. Good stuff. Enforced monogamy, polygamy, polygyny. Boy, what is the way forward? What's the biblical way forward? That's probably the better question. I think in an ideal situation, monogamy it's what we need. But sometimes, many times, it's not ideal. So maybe there needs to be a door left open. And I think that's what I told, Michael there, that I think to have righteous patriarchy, the door has to be left open. to polygamy. We'll see, though. I don't know. We'll see what the Lord does in the next coming decades, centuries. But we know this, what he will do is Christ will win. He said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Until next time, this is the Postmillennial Man.